WADR, promoting dialogue. It's midday in Dakar, 1 p.m. in Lagos. Good afternoon and welcome to Newslink on West Africa, Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM, Dakar, Senegal, and around the world at wadr.org. Here are the top stories. Gender activist reacts as the Gambia High Court acquits 3 suspects in FGM death trial over insufficient evidence.
I view the verdict as both a disappointment but also as a mark of progress. On one hand, the acquittal underscores how fragile justice becomes when investigations are poorly conducted.
A Guinean court to question former Prime Minister Kasore Fofana on hospital bed in corruption trial. Nigeria's House of Representatives launches probe into unpaid debts owed to the federal government.
Less attention has been placed on debt recovery as tool for show-off of the revenue profile of the federal government of Nigeria.
Ivorian President Ouattara appoints Ibrahim Coulibaly as head of Cote d'Ivoire's Council of State after the dissolution of the Independent Electoral Commission. Please stay with us for details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Augustine Bill Coley.
Many thanks for being with us. We begin with some judicial matters. First, in the Gambia, where the Budon High Court has acquitted and discharged 3 women accused in a female genital mutilation act or FGM case linked to the death of a baby girl. Justice Isatu Jan had ruled that the prosecution failed to provide sufficient legally admissible evidence after what she described as a serious investigative lapses by the police. The first accused, Fatou Kamara, had been charged with the prohibition of a female circumcision, an offense that carries a possible life sentence under Gambian law. The 2 other, Umin Sawane and Hawa Conted, were charged as accomplices in the case. However, gender activists have reacted to the ruling. One of these activists is Fatou Balde, a global women's rights advocate and funder of Women in Liberation and Leadership.
I view the verdict as both a disappointment but also as a mark of progress. On one hand, the acquittal underscores how fragile justice becomes when investigations are poorly conducted. Without strong evidence, even the gravest cases collapse, leaving survivors and families without closure. But at the same time, it is important to acknowledge the progress we have made as a country. As we know, in the Gambia, for decades, FGM was treated as a private matter, hidden from scrutiny. Today, FGM is being brought forward in the open, challenged in court, and debated nationally. We need to do better when it comes to dealing and prosecuting cases of gender-based violence. FGM is recognized globally as a form of GBV. In these cases, we must ensure that we strengthen investigations. Police and prosecutors must be trained to collect and preserve evidence that can withstand judicial scrutiny. Ensure we build survivor-centered justice systems where survivors and families are supported throughout the process, ensuring their voices are heard and respected. We must also invest in forensic capacity. Proper medical and forensic expertise is essential to prove harm in court. Furthermore, laws in the country must be backed by consistent enforcement and leadership that puts the protection of girls first. I think it is vital that we engage communities to shift social norms and prevent future cases.
Fatou Balde is a global women rights advocate and funder of the Women in Liberation and Leadership in the Gambia. Elsewhere in Guinea, the appeals chamber of the Kyiv has revived proceedings in the case involving former Prime Minister Ibrahim Kasore Fofana. He is expected to be questioned on Monday, May 11, at the Pasteur Clinic, where he remains hospitalized. The decision forms part of the appeal process following his conviction and 5-year prison sentence for embezzlement of public funds, illicit enrichment, and money laundering. Sankula Janko reports.
In a ruling issued on Thursday, the court ordered that former Prime Minister Ibrahim Kasore Fofana be questioned at his hospital bedside at the Pasteur Clinic. The hearing has been scheduled for Monday, May 11. According to the Kyiv Appeals Chamber, the session will take place in the presence of prosecutors, defense lawyers, representatives of the civil party, and the former Prime Minister's attending physician. The special prosecutor had requested that the court organize a special hearing at the clinic if Kasore Fofana's health condition prevented him from appearing publicly before the court. The prosecutor argued that such a measure would help avoid what he described as any form of pressure or leverage against the Guinean state. Neither the defense lawyers nor representatives of the civil party opposed the request, which has now been approved by the appeals chamber of the Crave. The last hearing in the case following Kasori Fofana's provisional release took place on April 30. The former Prime Minister is facing charges of embezzlement of public funds, illicit enrichment, and money laundering. In the initial ruling, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a decision his lawyers are now challenging through the appeal process.
Sankula Janko with the details of that report. Fight Bachano Alpha Ibrahim and Balde in Conakry. Away from judicial matters, we head to Mali, where road blockades imposed on several major highways by the group Janim continue to disrupt transportation across parts of the country. In Bamako, travelers at home bus stations have been stranded for days, uncertain about when they will finally be able to continue their journeyings. Caught between fear, anxiety, and exhaustion, many are struggling to cope with a situation that is becoming increasingly difficult to endure. Christopher Atichu has the details.
At this bus station in Medina Kura, in Bamako, buses remain packed as stranded passengers wait anxiously, hoping to return to their hometowns. For several days now, this young trader has been sleeping at the station, hoping to find transport to the town of Kita in western Mali.
I have been at this bus station for 4 days now, spending the nights in very difficult conditions. I am a trader, and with the Tabaski celebrations only days away, being stranded here is seriously affecting my business. The transport company has told us there are no departures or arrivals for now, but we are still waiting and hoping to travel to the town of Kita.
Nearby, a young woman is also struggling to remain calm. She was expected to travel to join her family for preparations ahead of a wedding, scheduled to take place in just a few days.
I've been here since the beginning of the week, and there are still no buses heading to Kita. I am very worried because my wedding is scheduled for next week, and if we are unable to travel because of the blockade on the road, it becomes extremely difficult. I am appealing to the army to intensify efforts to help us return to our hometowns.
Drivers also are living in fear, although some continue operating despite the risks. For its part, the Malian army says military operations are ongoing to secure the roads and gradually lift the blockade imposed by armed groups, which has severely disrupted movement in affected areas. Commandant Jibrila Maiga, Deputy Director of Public Relations for the Armed Forces.
The roads to Kai and Kita have become strategic strongholds for the terrorists. They have concentrated much of their forces along these roads. However, I can assure you that military operations are currently underway to make these roads accessible again.
As the Tabaski celebrations draw closer, the situation is deepening anxiety among many families as they are torn between the desire to reunite with loved ones and fears over traveling on roads considered increasingly dangerous.
Bamako correspondent Aliyu Cham's report voiced by Christopher Atichu.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Now crossing over to Nigeria, where the House of Representatives has launched a probe into unpaid debts owed to the federal government amid growing concerns over rising fiscal deficit and mounting debt burden. The move comes as the country's national debt is reported to have reached more than 153 trillion naira, raising questions about revenue recovery and economic sustainability. Our correspondent Yechenu Sasetu reports.
The House of Representatives says it is investigating outstanding debts owed to the federal government by individuals, organizations, and institutions across different sectors. Lawmakers say recovering the funds is necessary to improve government revenue and reduce pressure on public finances. The development comes as Nigeria's public debt profile climbed to about 153.29 trillion naira, according to recent figures from the Debt Management Office. Member of the House of Representatives, Salisu Yusuf, expressed concern over the growing debt burden, warning that failure to recover outstanding debt could further weaken the economy.
Driven by increased domestic borrowing and currency depreciation, the debt portfolio composed of over 53% domestic debt and roughly 47% external, with debt servicing consuming a significant 47.85% of government revenue in the first 9 months of 2025.
He also stressed the need for accountability and stronger measures to ensure debt recovery and proper management of public resources.
Aware that while the federal government has been diligent in servicing its debt, less attention has been placed on debt recovery as tool for show-off of the revenue profile of the federal government of Nigeria.
Lawmakers say the probe will identify defaulters, determine the actual value of unpaid obligations, and recommend measures to strengthen revenue generation. The investigation is expected to form part of broader efforts to address Nigeria's fiscal challenges and reduce dependence on borrowing. For WADR, Yechenu Sasitu in Abuja.
Let's take you to Cote d'Ivoire, where President Alassane Ouattara has appointed former Electoral Commission Chairman Ibrahim Coulibaly as head of the country's Council of State. The decision comes barely a day after the dissolution of the country's Independent Electoral Commission. The appointment places the senior magistrate at the helm of the nation's highest administrative court at a time of heightened political attention on governance and electoral institutions. Imo Edit gives the details.
Former chairman of Cote d'Ivoire's Independent Electoral Commission, Ibrahim Coulibaly, has been named president of the Council of State following a decree issued by President Alassane Ouattara. The announcement came barely a day after the dissolution of the Electoral Commission, which Coulibaly had chaired since 2019. He replaces Patrice Yao Kouakou as head of the Council of State, the country's highest administrative court. A seasoned magistrate, Coulibaly now assumes responsibility for an institution that oversees disputes involving public administration and ensures that state actions comply with the law. Council of State also adjudicates matters linked to local elections, examines the legality of administrative decisions, and provide advisory opinions to government on draft laws and decrees. Its ruling are final and binding on public authorities. Established under the country's revised 2020 constitution, the Council of State is considered a key pillar in upholding the rule of law, transparency, and accountability within public administration. Coulibaly's appointment comes at a politically significant moment for Cote d'Ivoire, with a renewed focus on institutions responsible for electoral governance and judicial oversight.
Imo Edit with that to report. Efforts to deepen Africa's economic and financial integration are gathering pace following confirmation that the African Monetary Institute will officially begin operations in September this year. The institution is expected to serve as a key transitional body towards the creation of an African central bank and eventually a single African currency under the African Union's Agenda 2063 vision. Francis Boniface reports.
African central bank governors are intensifying efforts to build institutions needed for a future continental monetary union, following confirmation that the African Monetary Institute will officially begin operations in September 2026. The announcement was made at a meeting of the Bureau of Association of African Central Banks in Dakar, Senegal. The institute will function as a transitional body tasked with preparing for the establishment of the African Central Bank and eventually a single African currency. President of the Association of African Central Banks and Governor of the Bank of Central African States, Yvonne Sana Bangui, described the move as a decisive step towards deeper monetary and financial integration across Africa. African Union Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry and Mines, Francisca Tachuk Bailobe, says preparations are ongoing to constitute the Institute's governing council ahead of its launch. Officials also confirmed that the African Monetary Institute will be headquartered in Abuja, Nigeria. The meeting in Dakar is reviewing the institute's proposed structure, operational budget, and financing arrangements before the recommendations are forwarded to the association's 41 member central banks. The African Monetary Institute forms part of the African Union's broader Agenda 2063 vision to strengthen economic integration and establish a unified African currency.
That's Francis Boniface reporting. You are listening to Newslink on West Africa, Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar, Senegal, and online at wadr.org. Here is a reminder of our top stories. Gender activist reacts as the Gambia High Court acquits 3 suspects in FGM death trial over insufficient evidence. A Guinean court to question former Prime Minister Kasori Fofana on hospital bed in corruption trial. Nigeria's House of Representatives launches probe into unpaid debts owed to the federal government. Ivorian President Ouattara appoints Ibrahim Coulibaly as head of Cote d'Ivoire's Council of State after the dissolution of the Independent Electoral Commission. Still ahead in the news, we have guest interview and sports. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Thank you for staying with us. We are streaming live on YouTube at WADR and on Facebook, WADR English Service. Here in Senegal, the National Agency for Statistics and Demography has announced a significant increase in revenues generated from oil exports. At a time of economic difficulty, many are asking how these gains could benefit the Wadr population. Abdullahi Hassan tells us more.
Since the discovery of oil and gas in Senegal, authorities have been banking on the sector to drive economic growth and development. In recent months, the country has been exporting crude oil and natural gas. According to the National Agency for Statistics and Demography, ENSD, revenues from oil exports in April were estimated at 227 billion CFA francs, up from 142 billion CFA francs recorded the previous month. Revenues from liquefied natural gas also increased, reaching nearly 31 billion CFA francs in April, compared to 17 billion CFA francs in March. The steady rise in earnings has raised hopes among citizens that the revenues will help ease the burden of rising living costs and difficult economic conditions. Senegal is hoping to eventually double its production and export of crude oil and gas. According to the ENSD, Switzerland and the Netherlands remain the country's main buyers for now.
Abdullahi Hassan with that report. Now to agriculture and business. In Ghana, concerns are growing over the financial health of the country's own cocoa purchasing company after reports emerged that thousands of farmers are yet to be paid for cocoa supplied several months ago. The produce buying company, widely known as PBC, is reportedly battling mounting debts and liquidity challenges that are affecting its ability to purchase cocoa, raising fresh questions about the stability of Ghana's cocoa sector. Nada Detete tells us more.
Ghana state-owned cocoa purchasing firm, the Produce Buying Company, is reportedly struggling to buy cocoa from farmers due to worsening financial difficulties and rising debt obligations. According to Reuters, citing a source familiar with the matter, the company owes cocoa farmers about 24 million cedis for more than 9,000 bags of cocoa already delivered, with some producers reportedly waiting for payment since November 2025. The source says the company's total debt burden has now risen to more than 670 million cedis, including unpaid salaries, statutory payments, vendor arrears, and loans owed to banks. A consortium of Ghanaian banks is also said to have obtained a court order permitting the sale of some company assets to recover more than 250 million cedis owed them. The Produce Buying Company serves as a buyer of last resort in Ghana's cocoa sector and operates across all cocoa growing districts in the country. Its financial troubles come despite government assurances earlier this year that the company will be revived to support farmers and strengthen confidence in the cocoa industry. Finance Minister Dr. Kasiela Toforson had pledged support for the company in February, describing its revival as important to ensuring transparent and reliable cocoa purchase for farmers. However, the source claims the company has not received the expected financial support from Cocoa Board or the Finance Ministry. The difficulties facing the produce buying company also reflect broader pressures within Ghana's cocoa sector, including weaker global demand, lower cocoa prices, and financing challenges affecting licensed buying companies. Industry observers warn that without urgent intervention, the crisis could further impact the livelihoods of thousands of smallholder cocoa farmers across the country. For WDR, Nadidi Teti, Accra.
Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the transitional government has approved more than 164 billion CFA francs in loans and grants to strengthen agriculture and boost food security nationwide. The financing package was adopted during Thursday's Council of Ministers and includes support from the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and the International Development Association. The World Bank's lending arm for income countries will fund the operation to support the transformation of agriculture in Burkina Faso. Deborah Amuro reports.
Authorities say the 5-year initiative will increase agricultural productivity, improve resilience to climate change, and strengthen the competitiveness of key agricultural sectors. The program includes the development of 3,900 hectares of irrigated farmland and the rehabilitation of 1,800 hectares of lowlands through labor-intensive public works. 2 major storage centers, each capable of holding 400,000 tons, are also planned for Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso. Additionally, the project will finance 800 agricultural sub-projects targeting farmers, returning populations, and former volunteers for the defense of the homeland undergoing socio-economic reintegration. Meanwhile, a second agreement signed with the African Development Fund and the African Development Bank will provide just over 60 billion CFA francs for an emergency agricultural production program. This initiative forms part of the second phase of Burkina Faso's emergency agricultural support project under the Lige Goli program. The funding will support the purchase of nearly 69,000 tons of fertilizer, create a strategic reserve stock, and supply more than 10,000 tons of improved seeds, including rice, maize, soybeans, millet, and wheat. These measures aim to strengthen long-term food security and support the development of Burkina Faso's agricultural sector.
Deborah Amuwa with that report.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
The guest interview focuses on Senegal as the country achieves a significant increase in the economic benefits of oil exports. This development was announced earlier this week by the National Statistics Agency. But in a challenging economic climate, how can this benefit its population? Suleiman Keita is an economist. He provides analysis in this interview with WDR.
Senegal truly crossed the 100,000 barrel per day mark. This is due to external factors. The ongoing war in the Middle East and North Africa has put considerable pressure on certain oil-producing countries to increase their production volumes in order to compensate for the losses they will incur. However, it's also worth noting that this increase is a result of the innovations, particularly logistical ones, that the Senegalese government has implemented to boost its production. The combination of all these factors explains the rise in Senegal's production during this period.
The Senegalese National Statistics Agency reports that the economic impact of oil exports increased to 142 billion CFA francs in March and 227 billion CFA francs in April. Can such a sustained increase mitigate the economic shocks predicted by the authorities, as well as those stemming from the crisis in the Middle East?
This increase in production volume has both short-term and long-term effects. In the short term, I mean that it allows the Senegalese government, at least, to have what we call a financial cushion because it will sell its production, which will allow it to meet its import needs. Because when we import, Senegal needs foreign currency. So this means that this situation will allow it to effectively offset its production volume. That's the first aspect. At the same time, that is a factor we mustn't forget. Senegal is also an importer of refined petroleum products, because currently the Senegalese government's production capacity doesn't allow it to refine its own oil. So what does that mean? It means that Senegal imports refined petroleum products despite being a producing country. And also in long term, this situation can indeed lead to what we call an additional cost, because it is forced to import the barrel, in fact, of oil to meet its local consumption demand. And this importation now can have long-term consequences right on the state of Senegal.
Given the high cost of living in Senegal, can these funds provide any relief?
Yes, in the short term, this really allows the Senegalese state to access a very significant financial cushion. Everything now depends on how this financial cushion is used. The state must make a strategic choice regarding the use of oil resources and invest them in promising sectors for development. It allows the state to have a financial cushion and effectively lower what we call the budget deficit. So if this financial windfall is used wisely, it's good news for the Senegalese economy.
How can these initial benefits from oil exports, which are steadily increasing, also provide concrete relief to the average citizen's economic situation?
You know, when the state has resources, it increases its production capacity. Now, if the state doesn't have resources, it's forced to go into debt. When the state goes into debt, it puts a strain on the state revenue. Why? Because the state is forced to pay its debt, to draw on taxes. Right now, this situation provides a financial windfall for the state. The state will rely less on businesses for tax payments to cover its operating expenses, will allow them to stimulate economic growth, create jobs, and ultimately improve well-being of the population.
Suleiman Keita is an economist speaking about the significant increase in the economic benefits of oil exports by Senegal. And in sports, the 2025-2026 sports season is drawing to a close, and as every year, several African players have distinguished themselves with their respective clubs. For the next edition of the African Player of the Year award, several names stand out. First and foremost is Sadio Mane. After a superb 2025 Africa Cup of Nations, the Lion of Teranga is a very strong contender. The tournament's best player, decisive in every match, Sadio Mane led his team with impressive leadership at club level. He is an indispensable part of Al Nassr's tactical startup. Sports enthusiasts say that if he performs well in the pending FIFA World Cup, he will undoubtedly be the 2026 African Player of the Year. Other names emerging is Brahim Diaz. Despite missing a penalty in the AFCON final, Diaz has been decisive in every match for Morocco. Even though he's heading for a trophyless season with Real Madrid, he doesn't diminish as well. However, he will need to have a strong World Cup with the Atlas Lion. Other boys like Ismail Assar on fire with Crystal Palace, and Ademola Lookman, who is reborn in Madrid, are also candidates to watch. With the latest sports news, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and online at wadr.org. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Mauro Ju for the technical support. To interact with us via our social media platform X, Instagram and Facebook at WDR English. I am Augustine Curley. Good afternoon.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Baft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening to Newslink.